From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Issue 1, Mars H2O.
Mars is not the dry, arid planet that we thought of in the past. Today we're going to announce that under certain circumstances, liquid water has been found on Mars.
This Thanksgiving, the McLaughlin Group is focusing on 3 issues relevant to America's future. First up, Mars. 405 years ago, in 1610, the astronomer Galileo first used a telescope to gaze upon Mars. And today, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, continues Galileo's efforts by sending probes like the automobile-sized Curiosity rover to explore the red planet. But with an annual budget of over $17.5 billion, NASA is not cheap. Still, NASA says it offers value for money. Making that case in recent months, NASA has announced the discovery of liquid water on Mars in warmer seasons. Because water is necessary for known forms of life, its presence means life might be possible on Mars. And water might also give future manned missions to Mars a measure of sustainment. Does the discovery of water on Mars make Obama's 2010 decision to cancel the Constellation program and NASA's manned Mars mission look short-sighted?
No, I don't think so, John. There's a lot of things we can do in space and we should be doing in space. My belief is in inner space. Mars is pretty far out there, even though it's one of the planets closest to the United States, just like Venus is on the other side. But look, we went to the moon, which was very close to us, which has, Mars has, in terms of gravity, it's not as big a planet as the United States, so the gravity is not quite as strong. And the idea, if you're thinking of it, of sending a man to Mars, I see no purpose to it. And I can tell you one thing about him, he ain't or she ain't coming back.
Well, the book and the movie, The Martian, starring Matt Damon, he does come back with a lot of creativity and the use of a lot of duct tape. Yeah. The movies, these are inspirational, and I think it's wonderful that we should still explore outer space. It's up to the next president to decide if they want to put the money into it. It's not out of the question. It's still part of NASA's goal to go to Mars, I think by 2035. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having that as a goal. And maybe the austerity.
They're going to put somebody up there?
Well, the atmosphere is really not conducive. And the water they found, they have a photograph of something that looks a little wet. It's not like swimming pool-sized bodies of water.
It's going to be a short stay, you're saying.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that Mars can sustain life, but maybe it once did. And, maybe the way we sometimes treat our planet, it'd be nice to have Mars as a backup plan. So go for it.
Can you foresee Paul Ryan, Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, confronting the launch of a manned mission to Mars?
No, I don't think he would confront that. I think Paul Ryan is much more concerned about reduced size of the federal government in discretionary spending, but primarily entitlement reform, big tax reform. One of the reasons, though, why I think there's relative consensus on NASA is because it embodies, in a pretty obvious and undeniable sense, the very best of what the United States can do, has done, stands for, inspiring the world. The space program, I remember a previous show I wasn't on, but the Kennedy speech you showed, that kind of oratory and inspiration to a new generation to go forwards. And actually, if you look at the size of the budget, you look at what we spend in other areas, I would say it's comparatively small for the prospective gains that we get, both in terms of exploration and learning about the solar system and the universe, but also in terms of the new technological developments. And I would just say as one final point to that, the big thing on Mars with the water there, why it's such an important discovery, I would say, is that the universe is a big place. And if we found water there, perhaps surprisingly, then what does that say about the potential of water elsewhere, and thus through that water, the potential of life elsewhere?
Yeah, how big is the universe?
I do not know the metric figure.
Larger than a bread
our
box.
universe, I mean, around the sun, and then you move into other areas, other suns and other planets. I mean, the stars are actually suns, John.
Right.
I'll give
And,
you a good
and so
idea.
there's other universes out there.
Well, solar systems,
well,
Think of the
galaxies.
universe as a collection, let's say.
Collect
of all
hundreds of billions
mini
of
universes.
galaxies.
We got it-
How
we
can
got
you have a
eight-
mini? By definition, a
Well, we got
universe
eight
is
pla-
universal.
But-
It's everywhere.
But you
Where
got
is
these
it? What's
planets,
everywhere?
John,
Actually-
you got the planets need certain requirements in terms of temperature and water and all the rest of it, gravity
Mars-
for any kind of life to exist.
Mars-
Talking
Well,
about the
if I may
universe, we're not
interject with
talking about-
Carl Sagan's observation years ago, there are 100 billion stars in our galaxy, and there are 100 billion galaxies in the visible
Billions and
universe
billions.
alone.
I think there's now like
Billions
400
and
billion, they
billions.
believe.
Visible universe.
In the visible universe alone.
Oh, wait a minute.
Yes.
We've got a visible universe and an invisible universe.
Oh, you got McLaughlin
That's
on this
because
now.
You know
it's
why-
invisible because our telescopes can't see it yet.
Well, you know why
When
they
we
call
get better
you know it's
telescopes,
there,
then
though.
we'll
You
see
know
it.
it's there.
Oh, yeah.
You
I
think
know
we're
it.
making news here on this program?
John,
No, we're
No.
not making news on this program.
I'm
But
waiting
when we
for,
do,
I'm
John,
waiting
you
for
know why
Matt
you
Damon.
can't see
I'm
it?
waiting for Matt
You know why you
Damon
can't
and
see it
Tom
is
Hanks
because
to
the
discover
speed of
the
light.
universe.
The speed of light.
Let-
Many of these stars that come in, the speed of light has finally traveled all the way from those universes to our world,
Right.
and you can bet there's new stars appear. That means the light from those stars has just arrived. Amazing. And
Well,
that
all those
travels
stars up there
at
that we see aren't there anymore.
187,000 miles per second.
And we learned that by spending government money and learning these things.
And that-
and,
and that-
and that's a
and-
good thing.
And the space program, you know, that I would say it's the best. That is government at its best, actually, and that limited expenditure for high
Eleanor
gain.
Galileo did not have a government contract.
But the jumps in the space age inspired obviously
Gotta
through
talk them into it.
competition with the
You gotta
Soviet
talk them
Union.
into it.
Well, he got in trouble too, John.
With the church.
would you call that
You
government
know, it's-
interference?
then
Put him in his
then the
apartment
church
for a while.
apologized
Well,
for
look,
it.
one of
Well,
the
he just did.
one of the things that's important though about this, you know, we talk about faster than light travel, the perspective element.
Faster?
It was called faster than light travel. When we're talking about the speed up of light, right, the potential of exploration beyond the solar system, beyond the galaxy, it requires that you travel faster than
You
light.
got to go to warp speed, as they say in
Right,
these
but
movies.
NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory does some really interesting work. I would go Google; it's fascinating about wormhole theory, black holes. I mean, I can't understand 90% of it, but it's impressive enough that you can get some meat out of that and understanding. And in a new century, when we have all the kind of ideas of globalization and challenge, this is a great area for America to inspire a new generation of students to get involved. It makes maths and science cool in an unmitigated way, right? And
Wait a
that
minute,
is.
you mean it's an election tool?
No, it's a tool to inspire
it's-
people to do
Well,
things
that's
that
the
generate
case,
a good, rewarding career path
Which of the
and benefit the
2016
nation.
candidates to the U.S. presidency will make a manned mission to Mars a reality? John Kennedy was the last Democrat to strongly back NASA.
John,
Today,
What are
who
you
we
talking
got?
about? Nixon was president in 1969-74 when all of the men landed on the moon. Since Nixon's been president, nobody's been to the moon. So Johnson gets great credit for it. Kennedy certainly started it, but Nixon did a great job on it, John, and he deserves some credit, especially from you.
And most
You're writing a book,
Right.
an apologia, if that's the right word.
I know I'm writing a book on Nixon's White House years, and I'm having trouble getting a happy ending to it all.
Right, exactly.
keep looking.
Maybe,
Keep looking
maybe you can send him
Remember on
on
the
a
plane together
spaceship to
with Nixon
Mars.
and he hadn't been made president yet?
Sure, I spent 3 years with him before he was
You
president.
carried his bag.
No, not exactly. But Shelley
carried
was
his
with him
baggage.
in 1959 and 60 when he ran against JFK.
You nearly got
Exit
assassinated,
on a
right?
probability
Venezuela.
scale from 0 to 100. How likely does it now seem that there is life on Mars?
Life comparable to ours, 0.
Yeah, maybe it existed once upon a time, but now, no.
No, but I think it makes it much more likely to the probability of that it is likely that there is life in the universe.
I think it's more likely that there was life on Mars, but there's also a lot of theories about at least one of the moons around Jupiter has the conditions for heat and water,
Close to
other
Earth.
elements there.
what
But
is
the
that?
heat comes
Yeah,
from
that,
internally.
Yeah, Mars doesn't have a climate that's conducive to human
Well,
life.
I'm declaring Clarence as correct. Issue 2, student census.
Hi, media. Can I talk to you?
No, you need to get out. You need to get out.
No, I don't. You need to get out.
I actually don't.
All right. Hey, who wants to help me get this reporter out of here? I need some muscle over here.
A debate over free speech is underway on the nation's campuses. That video shows a University of Missouri professor arguing with a reporter earlier this month. The professor and some students claim the media were infringing on a student, quote-unquote, safe space of contemplation. And watch what happened at Yale also this month after a master challenged an administration email warning students against offensive Halloween costumes.
It is not about creating an intellectual space. It is not. Do you understand that? It's about creating a home here. You are not doing that.
One commentator said about video we just saw that it reminded him of the Maoist Red Guards technique of Thamzing, which is public haranguing of ideological enemies. Is that the new rage on campus?
Well, John, it's not Red Guards. What the Red Guards did was beat these people up and brutalize them and kill them and frankly get into lynching them. Those are the
That
Maoists.
sounds like a campus, doesn't
That's
it?
a great proletarian cultural revolution. This sounds like a screaming 10-year-old, some pampered poodle on campus, spoiled brats really who really have not really suffered at all, and they're complaining and whining. Somebody called them a name. Somebody's wearing a costume with a sombrero, and it insults them. It just really shows, if you take a look at what happens to 19, 20-year-olds, World War II guys going up on beaches and dying, fighting for the country, and you got these people who are privileged and on university campuses whining and complaining. The problem, John, is the authorities on the university really don't have any moxie. They're just like the guys in the 1960s who
Be careful,
folded.
Pat. You're sounding like Mr. Wilson now. You're going to have him get off your lawn.
Right.
I mean, the fact is that I'm not unhappy to see fewer fraternity boys in blackface on campus, or the Indian headdress, etc. Yeah, it's not killing anybody, but it is insulting to various folks. And I mean, in my generation, we put up with it because we had bigger fish to fry in the 60s. You're absolutely right. My son's generation, they're a lot less patient about this sort of thing, and that's why you're seeing these campus uprisings. Yeah. But they're basically kids. They're students. They make mistakes, like yelling at photographers or yelling at reporters. That was dumb. They undermined their own success at getting the president to
20,
resign
21, 22 years old.
Yeah.
This is the world. People are going to call you names in the world.
That's right.
All of us have been called lots of different names.
I was called
and
lots of names.
I'm sure you were, and I've been called lots of names.
Yeah, but there is a systemic.
But he's going to list the names.
I had bigger fish to fry than worry about the names I was being called. We had a draft going on. We still had desegregation in a lot of parts of this country. I mean, there was a lot going on. We had bigger issues. This generation doesn't have those issues, but they've got other issues.
And the fact that the Paris attacks kind of drove all of these protests out of the news is a message also to some of these kids that, hey, there are bigger problems in the world. But Clarence is right. There are some genuine offensive acts that have occurred on these campuses that the administrators have turned their eyes away from, and that's worth pointing out. But
don't people have to stand up for their own rights? If somebody uses
the
N-word, why wouldn't you just go up and punch him right in the nose? You don't got to call the dean to help me out.
Not if they're putting swastikas and they're calling people the N-word. That has happened at that camp.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Not
So
painting
what?
a swastika?
No, well, look, here's the challenge we face.
Well, like I said,
that's worth complaining about.
If you were being insulted, you wouldn't tell people I'm whining. No,
I wouldn't go to the
I'm being
dean.
insulted.
I wouldn't go to the dean.
You go wherever you could find recourse. The fact is, if the dean wasn't offering recourse, and the dean's job is student affairs, and not taking care of student affairs, they aren't doing their job. And that was the core of the controversy. That's why the football team walked out, Pat. And you know, football teams don't walk out on political protests very often.
The dean of that school should have said, you guys are going to play Saturday, and if you don't play, we're putting on the scrubs, and you're out of school, and you're losing your scholarship.
Not when it's a
But he didn't, and the coach backed him. The coach backed him up.
Not when it's a winning, not when it's a
coach
winning
is
team
gone.
and they're making money for the
Here's
university.
let
They
me-
had
let
the
me
cause
try
and
and
they
field the team.
Millennial alert, let me get in here. All right. So the problem we have, I think, is that the college campuses have put it into the idea of chilling of speech, right? You send out these notices that you use the authority of the student-led government, right, or the professors, the deans, to impose some idea that you shouldn't dress this way. What that does is it forces this political issue into this area that's but profoundly, I would say, un-American in terms of non-free speech. The best way to deal with this is in the best form of American society, going back, number one, students need to read a lot more sort of Greek philosophy, Thomas Paine, Jefferson, American, instead of Gramsci and, Edward Said, but at the same time...
Speaking of Paine, Teddy Roosevelt called him a filthy little atheist. Now, what do you think of that of an insult?
No, but you want... Okay, but that's the point, right? Have that debate. But at the same time...
Probably wore it as a badge of honor. There are ways to do that, but not the kind of incidents that we're talking about that were at the heart of these protests.
When my generation at college, and I'm sure it's a different experience, my friends who are black, if someone came over in blackface to them, I would say, I would use some profanity no, but that's
nobody did that when I was in school.
No, and exactly, and that is a tribute to the
some of my white friends, of whom I had many, because blacks were a minority on that campus. But you couldn't depend on other people necessarily to stand up. You had to fight for yourself, sure. And these kids are fighting for themselves right now, using the means that they have available.
He was a student photographer.
Yes, he was.
And it is a balancing of rights. And the woman who was screaming about getting the muscle is a professor, and she later apologized. So they worked it out.
Yeah. But here's the thing.
She did lose her job in the
She lost her job in the journalism school. Yeah.
But not the communication school. The Missouri was separate schools there.
Here's the problem, though. Surely with a journalist, it gets very problematic if we have this idea that there is an interpretation of where that journalist has to... His perception of the story, or her perception of the story, should surely in public land define the pursuit of that story.
How about the rope line at the White House? That's what we're talking about here.
Do you remember
These
Father
people,
Hesburgh
they might have been unreasonable, but they were
Father
asking for
Hesburgh
space.
Father Hesburgh of Notre Dame. What about him?
1968, Father Hesburgh found a bunch of them demonstrating. He said, I'm going to tell you folks, you've got 15 minutes to make up your mind and get out of here. And if you don't, you will be suspended. And they wait another 15 minutes, and you will all be expelled. And that's exactly. He was a national hero for doing it.
National Guard, and the National Guard opened fire on the students.
Yeah. Well, what about?
Is that the right way or the wrong way to say it?
Expelling the guy, you're comparing him to shooting people at Kent State.
Yes, I'm saying expulsion may not be the proper way to deal with this.
You mean
maybe it's a university. You want to have dialogue and have people educate each other.
Dialogue when these people tell everybody else to shut up.
You don't expel the football team that's making your school money.
Beam me up, Scotty. Beam me up, Scotty. Hello. Should knowledge of the U.S. Constitution, including the Bill of Rights, be a requisite for college admission? You know that it is in the Constitution.
No, because that's a private...
This is about freedom of speech, but your freedom of speech ends when you, get to punch somebody else in the nose?
No, freedom of speech is guaranteed by the Constitution, the First Amendment.
Right. Yeah, but that's not the issue.
It doesn't guarantee yelling fire in a crowded theater.
No, of course not.
Right.
The fact is,
I'm not saying use the Constitution.
Those are the arguments they're having on campuses
John,
today.
if you are shouted down in a speech, who's going to guarantee your First Amendment rights? Who are you going to go to?
Right.
You haven't been silenced.
There's a question of rights versus.
You can raise that with college administrators. Freedom of speech according to the Constitution.
There's a question of rights versus
problem solving. Anybody that's been on a campaign has been shouted down at some point.
Then they have to prove, freedom of speech is not universal. No matter.
You move off the campus and move on to another campus.
Move to another campus. That's the way you'd handle it.
In a campaign. Often. I mean, look at Hubert Humphrey was shouted down for 1 month to where he couldn't speak. By these little fascists.
The issue here was a photographer's right to take pictures. Right. So we're talking about here. We're not talking about a big constitutional argument. The fact is, you work these kind of things out. Reporters, and I've been to many places where people will say, "You reporters stand back" or whatever. That doesn't necessarily mean your rights are being violated. It might just be a practical
If a student is getting financial,
walk him right out of the hall.
If a student is getting financial aid, there ought to be
a requirement.
Can I get this in?
Using muscle went over the line.
Hello.
Yeah.
To get a degree, a student has to know that the Constitution guarantees his freedom of speech.
I don't think anybody was arguing
where it occurs. I
don't think anybody was arguing the Constitution. In fact, the woman admitted she was wrong.
What about that student talking about those safe spaces?
Remember,
a college should be able to shout someone's being an asshole, but you should also be able to have an idea that a college, in a philosophical sense, is not a safe space because it is the exchange of ideas.
But that's been a trend on colleges, and some colleges take their role as in locus parentis pretty seriously. And I think it's okay to control safe spaces. There are lots of places that aren't safe, so
in a sea of freedom.
Well, and also those who ridicule safe spaces are people who never needed one. That's the difference.
Well, no, but this is what I'm saying, that you
Yes.
make sure you support your buddy or your girl who's getting this from some racist ass or whatever it is, but at the same time you're in a philosophy. You sit down with a Nazi and say, this is why you're crazy.
That's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is the individual does not get any support, and they're being harassed constantly.
I would debate with them.
Issue 3, Star Trek.
Risk is our business. That's what the Starship is all about. That's why we're aboard her.
Star Trek is the legendary creation of Gene Roddenberry that first aired on NBC in 1966. Under the helm of William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy in the respective roles of Captain Kirk and Science Officer Spock, Star Trek gained acclaim for broaching controversial social issues for public debate. This month, following in the footsteps of 5 television Star Trek series and 12 motion pictures, CBS announced that it will release a new Star Trek series in 2017. So, to accommodate the brave new world of media magic, the new series will air online via CBS's pay-per-view service rather than on straight television. Regardless, it is a bold gambit by CBS executives. Star Trek has a loyal following, but its most recent TV incarnation, Star Trek Enterprise, failed to generate acclaim and was unceremoniously canceled after 5 seasons. Question, will Star Trek find its way in 2017? I ask you, Tom.
Yes, I think it will find its way, and I think it will for a couple of reasons. If we think about all the different debates that are ongoing at the moment from the social side, gay rights, abortion, scientific research, to political issues abroad, the war on terror, ISIS, poverty, the role of government, all of these things bind up with the idea of the original Star Trek in the 1960s in a period of social flux. And I think it makes it relevant, and I think CBS, if they brand it correctly, they get the right actors, they make it exciting, they have good script writers, they can be very successful with this, because if you've seen with the recent movies, Star Trek has become popular again in that regard, at least.
That very last gift was the big one, though. Starting up with good scripts. I'm a Trekkie from way back, episode 1. I've seen many incarnations, and so is my son, who's more expert than I am. I mean, that franchise lives, but some of them are turkeys because they aren't well written, and that's something that that we still have to wait and see whether CBS puts a lot of money into this. Everything but the writers. The writers always get paid last.
Well, Star Trek started in the 60s, but it's created generation after generation of Trekkies, and so I think it's going to do well again. And they were ahead of the curve in terms of having an integrated spaceship crew in terms of gender and race, and they are credited with pushing the boundaries on a number of the social cultural issues, which is why Pat, I'm sure, never watched it.
William Shatner was voted, I think, by the Canadians the most famous Canadian or greatest Canadian of all time for that achievement. But yeah, I saw the original ones, but some of the original ones, but I wasn't caught up, and then by the late 1960s, I wasn't watching TV shows. But I will think it would be good in this sense. First, CBS isn't going at this thing unless they see some money in it. Secondly, it will show, you take the original Star Trek with Shatner and Dr. Spock and the gal in there, and who's a lieutenant, and put them together.
Lieutenant Uhuru.
But yeah,
but Sulu was on the communications.
Put the cultural, social, moral issues and measure the originals with what's coming. And I think we'll have a yardstick. Some people would say of decline. I'm sure others would say of rise.
It's also going to be, pay-per-view, isn't it? It's going to be and digital and all that. So it's not like you're not going to go turn your TV on to watch it.
Well, I also think as well, see, like I'm a huge Trekkie. Like your son, I could probably, I know the viewers will find this very illuminating, but I could probably write an essay on the Romulan Star Empire's politics of the 24th century. That might not be relevant, but At the same time, what I always liked about Star Trek is that as much as it had a sort of more liberal bent, let's say, on some of these issues, it came from a position of a military structure on a ship that was designed towards exploration, defense, but standing up for basic things, freedom of speech, etc.
Right.
And so it allowed it to be a cross-section of American society and human society, and that was an alien society.
That new race of the Vulcans with those pointy ears, I mean, there's something to aspire to.
They didn't have great sense of humor.
Does it sadden you?
To have that.
It doesn't compare with Star Wars, I don't think.
Does it sadden you
Come
that
on, what are you talking
hello? Does it sadden you that low-income households will no longer be able to watch Star Trek for free?
No.
Does it sadden you at all?
No, it doesn't.
I think it probably should be accessible to more people.
If it makes money, it'll be made accessible.
Exactly.
The
market will sort it.
Yeah,
One
exactly.
virtue of broadcast television and Rabbit Ears antenna is that it was free. Anyone who owned a set could watch great entertainment and news without paying any additional fees except for electricity.
But there are only 3 channels then.
Predictions, Pat.
The terrorist attacks in Paris, John, are going to move politics in Europe and, quite frankly, in the United States, and already have on immigrations and issues like that, very sharply to the right everywhere.
I would hope that on this Thanksgiving weekend that people would reflect on how very lucky we are in this country to have really lived mostly without the scourge of terrorism, and to open our hearts to the people from Syria who are fleeing from the very forces that we condemn. And I think that the American people will not move as far to the right as Pat Buchanan is suggesting. We didn't just elect President Trump because of the Paris attacks.
I predict that 2016 will be one of the most challenging years in the history of the Fifth Republic, France, in terms of social dialogue. The same things Pat's talking about. Marine Le Pen is very possibly moving towards a 2007 presidential victory in terms of what's happening.
I think you can expect to see more colleges facing student protests, but unlike Pat's remedies, most presidents now are going to act proactively to try to get dialogue going before the protests begin.
Expel 1 or 2, Clarence. I've been expelled. It's not that bad.
All right, let's settle down here and get realistic. This year's Black Friday retail sales will fail to top last year's $50 billion figure, continuing a 3-year downtrend for Black Friday. But retailers should not panic. Overall holiday sales will still be up this year. Happy Thanksgiving weekend. Bye-bye.